Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unbound podcast. This week, I am joined by another alumni, Michael Caprera, who's here to talk about, his history in Unbound, but also he has a lot to say about the importance of taking risks and of learning as much as you can, especially at this stage in life. And I think he's got some really great things to say about it. So we'll dive into that in the show this week. And before we do, just want to remind you guys that if you know someone who's a good fit for our program, a good fit for our community, you can go to beunbound.us/refer and see the free perks that come. You could generate a unique referral link. You send that to your friend. If they enroll, you get free registration to an event of your choice, and you also get free access to our Navigate course, which is upwards of an $850 value that you get for free. And then also the student that you refer gets a $250 discount. So pretty cool. So if you know somebody, go to beunbound.us/refer. Also, for those of you who have been asking about it, who have been curious, we are about to do a second run of the Navigate course. Enrollment will be opening for that soon. And so I'll be sure to let you guys know when that's open. We're super excited about it. The pilot class that we ran in the fall loved the Navigate course, and we've gotten a lot of really positive reviews. So be on the lookout for that, and we'll be sure to let you guys know. So yeah, just to get started, for the maybe 4 students that haven't met you at an event yet, because these days it seems like you're at almost all of them, I guess, how did you find Unbound, and when did you start getting involved in the community?
Yeah, so I started College Plus, a real oldie, back in 2014, so August of 2014. But I heard about it. I knew of College Plus. I knew some people that had did it in high school, and those people that graduated in 2 years. I'm like, But I took a gap year between high school and college, and part of that gap year, I did an internship in Taiwan, doing music composition and acting on a English teaching TV program. It was pretty awesome. And so I actually did my enrollment call for College Plus while in Taiwan using a Google Voice number, which was pretty cool. Partially because I had no money for regular college. So like College Plus just kind of became the de facto, but it was also something that I was kind of excited about. And I did a year of College Plus through so that would have been August 2014 through 2015, and was really struggling, honestly, because it was this really bizarre college program, and everyone else was doing the cool things. I wanted to go to music school, and here I am doing this weird college program. And out of the blue, Amy Comer, which was another OG College Plus student, called me up, and she was on the student cabinet for CPE3 Apex. In 2015, called me up, Michael, you need to come to Apex. You need to come to Apex. What is Apex? It's this amazing thing. You need to come. And so by sheer enthusiasm alone, I went to Apex and I signed up and was thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'd seen the forums. I'd seen the whole Fishes Occupy, which is like way OG, and I'm just weirded out by everything. And so I go to Apex and meet all these amazing people, including you at that Apex back in Texas, and just fell in love. So the community just really changed everything for my College Plus experience / Lou Merritt / Unbound experience. And from there, I was part of the pilot program for the Anthill Initiative that Elizabeth Schwindel at that time started. Among other people, and then Josh Shee and I met at CPE at Apex, and we started the New England Engage group, which was the first non-Texan Engage group.
See, that's the thing, because the balance of power is very much in Virginia now, but back in the day, Texas was the place. Like a ton of students were in Texas, headquarters was in Texas. So, and it's funny you mentioned Amy too, because it's like, I can 100% imagine that. I was on the same cabinet with her in 2016. It's like when Amy calls you and tells you to show up, you show up. Like
exactly.
There's no saying no to that. So that's hilarious.
Yes. So Amy was like the neutralizer of my opinions of College Plus and everyone being involved with it being really weird. but like she was the normalizer.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how I got involved in the community, and I've been pretty active since, going to all the Apex except 2017 because I needed to go shoot the solar eclipse in the Grand Tetons
I remember
during the
that.
same time. So I was so disappointed.
The photos were great. The photos were great. I mean, we missed you, but the photos were great. So.
Yeah. Priorities.
That's right, man.
Yeah.
Very cool. So you got involved fairly early. Some people wait a few years, but it seems like you got involved about a year in when Amy called you, and then you got plugged in pretty deep. That's awesome. And then, so you mentioned Josh Shee as well, who lives in Colorado right now, and you just recently moved there as well.
I did.
And so I'm curious to hear more about that. A, how's it going? I mean, I was in Colorado Springs for a Spark just a few months ago, and it's a beautiful area, but I'm just kind of curious to hear how things have been for you.
It's been a challenge, but ultimately I'm so glad that I moved. So backstory, I finished my degree from Unbound and Thomas Edison in information technology in June of 2019. And I had just started as a help desk representative at a IT support company back in Massachusetts, where I lived and where I grew up in. And was going decently well, was crazy busy. And I went to, speaking of more astronomy, I went to go see the Mercury transit in Florida on a whim. And we'll talk about this on a whim a little bit more later, but on a whim, and because it was going to be cloudy in Massachusetts, and got some amazing pictures of the Mercury transit, came home, worked 3 days, and got laid off unexpectedly from my job.
Wow.
And I did this amazing trip really on a whim. Came home, got told I was going to be the worship director for my church. The worship director was resigning, and that I got laid off from my job all within 3 days. And it was quite interesting. The normal response to being laid off is being sad and depressed, but I had been so stressed out by this job and a somewhat toxic environment. The environment I needed to be in to grow at that time, but I was not looking forward to the long-term outlook of it, that I got laid off and went home, driving home, singing and dancing. I'm like, yes! Yep. Not a normal response, but that was the situation I was in.
I think anyone who's had a terrible job can relate to that.
Yeah, it's just like, you just gave me unemployment. I didn't have to quit.
Yeah, 100%.
So, I had never taken a break during my college time. I had always been working, and for the last 2.5 years, I was taking classes back to back to back to back while working. And so I just needed a break. So I just took a couple months and did nothing. It was like the only college break I'd ever had. And brings us up to January of this year, or 2020. Started doing some independent contracting work and driving for Lyft and just kind of figuring out life. And that was going decently well. I was looking to start kind of a business doing independent IT contracting work. And coronavirus happened. And so I just finished a contracting gig that I was doing, and flights were incredibly cheap. And I just needed a break again because I was working 3 jobs, music director, IT, and Lyft, and I burnt out, flamed out, and just needed a break. And so I saw that flights were really cheap, and it was like, you know what? Let's go somewhere. So I called up a bunch of people. I texted a bunch of people. I texted the Virginia Unbound group, which was unresponsive. And I texted like the Colorado Unbound people that I knew, and they were like right on the ball. So they won that lead. And so I flew out to Colorado, booked my flight, and got on the plane 24 hours later and booked a rental car. And while I was on the plane, Massachusetts announced they were shutting down. So like the world is imploding. And I kind of had the anticipation that something might happen. And so I brought a little extra clothes and I had no real job commitments to worry about. So yeah, I got here and had to deal with the reality that the world was changing, and but also really loved it here. So it ended up staying with the Vaughns. Ashley Vaughn is another Unbound alum, and that was just really awesome. And then came down, saw Josh and Jordan Shee, and saw the McDonald's, Eddie and Brittany McDonald, and just connected with all these Unbound people. And basically, 3 days into was going to be a 5-day trip, I was like, you know what? With a little bit of barely nudging from Josh, Eddie, and Brittany, I canceled my return flight and stayed for 3.5 weeks. And the return flight, after rebooking it, was like $29.40, including taxes, fees, and bags, for a direct flight from Denver to Boston.
That's less than checking a bag, dude. That's wild.
Yeah. And so I ended up couch surfing, sometimes not knowing where I was going to be staying the next day, with various Unbound people, for 3.5 weeks. And that was quite the risk. And to ask, and not be dependent, but also realize that every interaction is a negotiation. And so people needed breaks, and ultimately I was responsible for my own well-being, but that didn't diminish the fact that I could ask, to be able to stay at people's houses, and people were willing to host. So, yeah, I decided that I was going to move here. I saw more opportunity. I didn't have ties to New England. I had lived there my whole life, and realized that I just didn't see a roadmap in New England. I was starting to make one, and it just wasn't where I was wanting to go. And I saw the opportunities for better growth and better community and better relationships here. And so I took the risk. I took the plunge, decided I was going to move here. I flew back home and just sat around for months, because I was prepping to get here, and moved out in August. So that's the really long story, but it's been a wild ride. It's been a wild ride, and I'm so glad that I did it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, like, when you describe that, like, I consider myself a risk taker. But when you say, like, oh, yeah, I was just, like, couch surfing for, like, however many weeks, I'm like, I wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't do that. I guess that's the thing. That is not my personality profile at all. I was terrified. Like, terrified. Am I going to be sleeping in my car tonight?
Right. Which honestly is not the worst thing that could happen. But, like, I guess what like prepared you mentally to take on that risk? Because, like, I would think if I landed myself in that same situation, I'd be like, well, that's cool, everybody, but I'm going to catch my flight home. Like, that would be my reaction. So I guess what like changed for you?
There's a lot of things. So you don't couch surf for 3.5 weeks without having, like, a life story behind it, because the thing with risk is being able to push yourselves to the boundaries of where you are at that moment, come back and recover, and then you can be able to push yourselves to a new boundary that's a little bit farther than where you were. And so, for instance, I knew I didn't know that I could do it, but I would make it work. Like I said, in high school, at the end of high school, I was living in Taiwan for 3 months, and I didn't know a lick of Mandarin. I got on the wrong buses because I didn't know what the symbols were, and I survived. And so I knew that I had that in the back of my head. Worst case scenario, when you speak the same language, it makes life significantly easier than that. And I survived there. And then I lived in Boston for a summer doing a program there. It was the most intense summer of my life. I was burnt out so many times, and I saw God work in so many ways. There was one scenario, because I was working, I was leading a team, I was doing one-on-ones with people. Every single night was activities, and I was doing 2 classes. And so there was one night that I came back, I was so burnt out. I had a little barf bucket in my car just in case, and got back and was trying to do a one-on-one with a teammate or one of my team members that had kind of recently become a Christian, and I was kind of mentoring and discipling him. And I was flat out on the couch. I could barely talk. I was so burnt out. Mm-hmm. And we had the most amazing conversation in that complete and utter brokenness, and was able to answer a bunch of his questions and encourage him, despite the fact that I was completely obliterated. And it's those places where you see God work, when my natural tendency is to have pride and, oh, look at me, I do all these amazing mm-hmm. things. I can outsmart people or go around all these different things because I'm unbound. But then when I take away all of those things and all I have left is God supporting me, it's an amazing place to be. So those are the steps that got me closer and closer to be able to take this amazing risk to come out to Colorado.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I've seen the same thing. It's like when my gas tank is empty, that's when I really see God. That's when I really have to be dependent on him. And sometimes my gas tank is empty just because of my own lack of judgment. Yeah. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just what happens in life. And sometimes life will rake you over the coals at times. And so I think that that mindset of essentially I've had worse, right? Yeah. And so you don't really view the current situation as particularly risky or desperate. You're like, this is actually not so bad, right? It's not the best, but it's not bad. Yeah. And I think having those experiences really gives you that kind of perspective.
It also awesome. Gives you the perspective that no matter how difficult the time, you'll eventually get to the other side. So it's absolutely season. It's a season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very cool. And so I guess, and what are you doing now for work?
So one thing with risk is sometimes the risk reward ratio, sometimes you get the reward and sometimes it falls through. And I came out with no job and barely got housing, and basically was going to almost do another couch surf, except moving. And so I was able to get some housing, and but all the job prospects that I had fell through. I mean, we're talking third round interviews, 31 back and forth emails. You're the best candidate we've ever had. We totally see you're going to be a CEO someday, comments in interviews, and then turn me down. Yeah. So that's incredibly frustrating and demoralizing. But realizing that God has a bigger plan. I'm just going to keep doing each day as it comes. It's hard, but I'll get out on the other side. And so 4 months go by and still no job. And just at the beginning of this year, I started at a new company called Lead Simple. And I'm doing customer support there. And it's been such a great fit. All these dream jobs that I was really looking forward to falling through and being upset about it. And then God placed me in the job that I needed, and the job that was going to be the better fit. So it's been a huge blessing, and actually got connected through a fellow Unbound person over Thanksgiving. So yeah, that's awesome. That's part of taking risks, because you never know what's going to happen. So you have to budget in for the surprise. My analytical brain is just here's the information that I have. How do I work with information if I have? But sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. And so you kind of have to budget in the wild card, because it can happen. Yeah. But you can't rely on it to happen, but it can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's such an important point, because that's something that it took me a little while to learn, which is basically that managing risk is not about avoiding risk. It's about creating room to fail. So that could be as simple as having an emergency savings account. Yeah. So if you're if my whole life blows up, I can survive for at least 6 months, right? You've got that, always there. which of course that's kind of part of the Dave Ramsey school of thought, but it's sound reasoning. And it's like, and I mean, at the end of the day, there's certain risks that you can't avoid. There's always a possibility that you get fired or that your car is totaled or that, like, we take risks every day that we just don't, that we take for granted because, they're so common to us. But, I mean, not to just like, I'm not fear mongering, but catastrophic things could happen anytime. And so
exactly.
When you realize that other risks that you're worried about taking are not such a big deal, because you're like, well, technically every day I'm taking a risk bigger than this because I'm driving a car, and that's pretty dangerous statistically. So, I think that's super fascinating. And so I think it's also great that you got connected to your current job through the community. That's not the first time that's happened. So this is kind of a job network, guys. Sometimes it happens. But
yeah, networking, lots of networking. Do lots of networking. It's definitely helpful. Why reinvent the wheel when you already have the wheel there?
Yeah, exactly. And they're currently hiring too, right? So that's like some of our students may be interested.
So I know that some of our students have heard of Profit Coach because that's been promoted. This is one of the co-founders of Profit Coach. And so our company, Lead Simple, is actually looking for new customer support reps. And so if you're interested, go ahead and message me. You can message me on Facebook or message Ben. And I can get you in contact with that because it's a great company, there's other Unbound students who are working there and would honestly be a great fit for a lot of Unbound students. So let us know if you're interested.
100%. The other thing that you were talking to me about, and actually you've been posting on social media about this for a few months, but that when you came out to Colorado, you set some goals for yourself. So I'm just curious, I think our listeners would be interested to hear, like, what were those goals and like, how are they going?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I saw coming out to Colorado was the opportunity for growth. Something that hit me like a steamroll, was just how much I was starving for good community and a growth path to be able to be myself instead of living in the shadows of other people. And it's this weird balance of you are part of family, but you need to be able to have your own identity. And so I saw Colorado as a place where I could flesh those things out. And I set 3 pillars that I was going to focus on while I was here, whether it was for a couple years or for long term. And those pillars were, I wanted to work on physical development. I gained so much weight over COVID. And in my last job, I gained like 40 pounds.
I think we all did. Yeah, I'm up too.
I gained like 40 pounds in 18 months. I'm like, how is this even possible? And so Colorado, I love hiking. I love biking. And the fact that there's less oxygen here just reminds you of how fat you are and how you need to be in shape. So like the social peer pressure is great. Or that like 70-year-old grandma going through the grocery store who's just like a lifelong runner and you're like, oh. So physical. And since moving here, I've lost like 17 pounds and have definitely, it's been pretty awesome. So that's 1. 2 was spiritual development. I had been in a church. Again, I was the music director at that church for half of my life. I was at the church, but not the music director. But I just wasn't growing. And to the point that I was seeking growth outside of the church in other church young adult small groups. And I saw the Christian Mecca of all places, Colorado Springs, as a place to actually get some growth there. Even though it might be a bubble, because sometimes you have to go and grow to be able to go out into the world. And then the other one was relational and community. So I saw that there was just more opportunity for community here. I like to put it that people in New England are just as lonely as people in Colorado Springs, but people in New England are so stuck in their ways because their family got off the Mayflower and have lived there ever since. No joke, I know people that are descendants directly to the Mayflower. And so there's no place for letting people in because there's just this hard shell around people compared to Colorado Springs where no one's from here, percentage-wise. So you connect with people because everybody's lonely and they're willing to admit it. So to the point of walking into Bible studies where I didn't know anybody, walking into churches where I didn't know anybody. I even met someone on the side of the road, and we became great friends shooting photography together.
Yeah.
So proceed at your own discretion on things of that nature.
Right,
but
of course, stranger danger and all that.
But so those are the
awesome.
are the three things that I'm focusing on here, and that's how I've structured how I interact with people, seek out places to grow, how I've picked a church, and such.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And I think it's very appropriate right now, especially while everybody's still working on their goals. It's still January, so some people are still sticking with it. Some people have already given up, but you've already been at it for like 6 months or something like that. And that's great. Yeah. But well, before we close it out, any additional words of wisdom for us and our listeners here?
Yeah. So I've talked about taking risks, and sometimes when you take a risk, you fail. And so you got to figure out ways to be able to fail well. I came out, I did have an emergency fund. I did have savings. So I knew that I had several months to be able to do something like this. But being able to put yourself in places where you can risk and fail. And then realizing that Apex Spark was all about community, and we have the community initiative happening right now. Go meet your neighbors. It's important. But yeah, taking the risk to be known and to know others is just as terrifying as for some people as jumping out of a plane is for others. And the reality is that you can't get the fullness of what God has given us in life, the reward of authenticity, of deep relationships, if you don't take the risk to be able to be known. Again, like, you can still get burned, proceed at your own discretion, but sometimes life, you just got to take the risk to be able to push into what's hard to get the reward. Elon Musk is the way he is as the richest man in the world with Tesla and SpaceX, because he took bold and audacious risks. Unbound, we're constantly striving to do extraordinary at the ordinary. And you don't do extraordinary by following the ordinary path. And so, yeah, sometimes it looks crazy to other people, but if you're focusing on those goals, you can line your risks, and instead of just managing them, work towards something more important. And that all boils down to, what does it look like to risk believing what God says, who we are, that we are loved, we are known, and we are worthy of him. And what if we were to actually risk accepting and believing that on a day-to-day basis, the rewards are fantastic. But we constantly go back and forth and doubt and have fears and uncertainties, and that's just part of reality. So risk well, risk rationally, and
yes.
Be bold and know that it's worth it. Like, the reward is worth the risk, even though the risk is absolutely terrifying to people sometimes, including myself.
Awesome, man. That's a great place to close it. And for those of you guys that don't know, Michael is actually our podcast producer. So he's going to take this recording and edit it and prepare it for you to listen to it. So very thankful for your service to our podcast, Michael, and of course for your involvement in our community, the ways you've contributed over the years, and really glad to have you on this podcast. Once again, guys, you can go to beunbound.us/refer to generate your unique referral link, and we'll let you guys know about Navigate, and we will see you guys next week.